Okay, we're going to give it another minute here as folks are just getting on board.
Yeah, I'm still admitting just a few people here in the waiting room. Hi, everybody. Welcome.
Okay. All right, let's go ahead and get this started up. All right. Well, just I want to say thank you all for being with us here today. We know there's a lot folks are managing these days, so we want to just thank you for spending every bit of your time with us and really appreciate it. My name is Sam Barrasso, and I'm with the PCEF startup team, and I'm just going to give you a little overview of the day and how we're going to connect with each other in terms of engaging in this platform, and a little run over the agenda before I hand over to James. So, as you all see on the screen, we've got our virtual participation checklist. It's just to say that we're gonna, folks are going to be able to folks are going to be able to ask questions either via the chat box or by raising your hands. You can turn your videos on if you want, but you don't have to. We hope that you can keep your microphones muted when you are not speaking, but if you raise your hand, we will call on you and we will unmute your mic for you. And then lastly, if you need any tech help, I will manage that. So please just directly chat me in the box, and we are recording this meeting. So, but before we dig into fully the content here today, I just want to provide a little overview. As folks know, PCEF was created to advance climate action in ways that center equity and justice. And so for that, we know that it's really critical we hear from you all in getting feedback around what we are proposing. We recognize this is our first year in this program, and that this program, there isn't necessarily a model to look to. There are elements of other programs like this that we've looked to, but there's nothing exactly like this. So what we've put together is a program that recognizes that we are going to see grant investment proposals that are various sizes and projects, and when we've presented a proposal that is attempting to center equity in frontline communities. So there's a whole lot that has gone into this, but I just want to acknowledge there's phenomenal work and hard work of the grant subcommittee that worked on the grant scoring criteria, as well as the staff, as well as the full committee. This work involved meeting with both public and private funders to understand their best practices, as well as understanding the experiences of others in managing this sort of work. So just as we get into today, what we're going to do is, what we want to do from an objective perspective is we want to make sure that you all are well suited to navigating the public comment, this public comment process and the grant scoring criteria. So we want to make sure that you can successfully navigate that. And so while we're here, we're going to first focus on answering any clarifying questions that you have, so that you know what we mean in any one of the areas of the document. At the same end, we're also just going to help you understand how to navigate the document, because there are 104 pages in it, and there are ways to be efficient with how you use your time as well. And then at the end, provided that we have time, we're able to answer everyone's clarifying questions so they feel comfortable in going back and responding and providing us feedback. We will open it up so that we can answer and respond to comments that you all have as well. So I think just want to set that up, in that I know that there's going to be a lot that folks want to share, and we're going to focus first when we open it up on clarifying questions, and then we will go to comments. And before all that, we're just going to give you sort of a high-level overview of this public comment process and orient you to the documents as well. So with that, I just want to say, before we turn it over, what we're going to ask for folks to do is that, I've introduced myself. I'm going to have PCEF staff introduce themselves, and we'd love to have everyone else also introduce themselves via the chat box. So I think what we'll do is I'll just acknowledge myself, send it around to staff, and have everyone else just introduce yourselves via the chat box. All right, with that, I'll turn it to James to introduce yourself.
Everybody, I'm James Valdez, PCEF staff, he, him pronouns, and yeah, I'll be providing the bulk of the content for today's webinar.
Thank you. Turn over to Katie.
This is Katie Lister, PCEF staff.
Great. And Janet.
Janet Hammer, PCEF staff.
Great. So as I turn this over to James, I'd just love for, again, just call out to folks that are on the meeting to go ahead, and I hope that everyone can, everyone can publicly comment. So go ahead and just introduce yourselves via the chat box, and we're going to go ahead and kick this meeting off. So with that, I'll turn it over to James just to kick us off in the next slide.
All right, great. Thanks, Sam, and thank you all for being here and joining us. Still letting a few more people in kind of as we go here. So just want to provide a brief overview. You know, we've been launching this program for a number of months now, and you may have seen the slide before, but just wanted to review what types of projects the Portland Clean Energy Community Benefits Fund envisioned and the different funding categories. So those are broadly clean energy programs, which can include renewable energy, energy efficiency projects for residential, commercial, or school properties, and a lot can live within that. Green infrastructure projects, which are 10 to 15% of the fund allocation, and really are projects that result in carbon sequestration or carbon benefits within the natural spaces of our cities, and can include things like planting street trees, bioswales, urban agriculture and farming, things like that. Workforce and contractor development projects, which are projects that are intended to really implement the vision of PCEF in building a diverse workforce and a pool of both workers and contractors to do these jobs in clean energy, green infrastructure. And then an allocation for innovation, which recognizes that there's a lot of climate and equity related work that doesn't fit into these existing buckets. And so allowing for a little bit of creativity and looking to the future to new ideas. And want to also, I think maybe for the first time, publicly announce what we feel will be the number for the first year of funding. We do anticipate that we'll be able to allocate about $8 million worth of funding for this first round in 2020. In year 2 and beyond, so the year 2021 and beyond, we anticipate that we'll have between $40 to $60 million annually, and that is on an ongoing basis. And so as we look to the kind of buckets of funding, we've done a lot of work with the grant committee to identify kind of different elements and types of grants. And so broadly, these are broken into project grants and planning grants that we're soliciting feedback on and have developed the application process for, and all the materials that we're going to be really talking about today are within the framework of either project grants or planning grants. There's also been some initial kind of allocation and thresholds created for the amount of funding that an organization could apply for in those grant categories. And so the first is small grants, which can be up to $200,000 and can have a duration or maximum time of implementing that grant of 3 years. There's also the opportunity for large grants, which would be grants up to $1 million and would allow for up to 5 years of implementation. This distinction is important as you look through the application materials, because there's, as you might imagine, a difference in the kind of content that is required for large grants versus small grants. And we'll get into a little bit of that, but we're not going to go into detail in this webinar about those differences. Also, we recognize that some organizations aren't quite ready to apply for a project grant. And so we wanted to provide an opportunity for planning grants. And this would allow for other types of resources to support the analysis, outreach, collaborative activities that might be required in order to fully develop a project idea. And so these proposals can be for up to $100,000, but we do anticipate that they'll be used within about a year. Also, I want to note that as a program, the Portland Clean Energy Fund also envisions a couple other types of smaller grants that we're not really asking for public comment in this period. And one of those is what we're calling application support grants. We're looking to be able to deploy this in the very near future, pending City Council approval. And these would be grants up to $5,000 available later this year in July or August to help organizations get ready to apply for PCEF funds or for other grant opportunities. And really it's part of our capacity building efforts as we look to elevate smaller organizations, especially those serving Black and Indigenous communities. Further into next year, we also envision the opportunity for something we're calling mini grants, which are grants that would be for events or specific organizational needs that are, again, smaller than $5,000. And so, again, while those are envisioned, they're not really the focus of the public comment period. We're really focusing those on these three elements of small grants, large grants, and planning grants. So as we've developed all this material for those grants over the past months, we've really sought to provide this to the public in a transparent and open way. And we recognize that by doing that, there's a lot of content. And so we recognize that is very daunting when you would just see it all at once. And so the purpose of this webinar is to help you navigate a little bit through that. And I'll be doing that in real time. So the content that we have here is broken out into a table of contents that you can click through. And so I'm going to actually shift to showing you directly how this looks within the website. And so it'll take me just one moment to do that. And I will start sharing. So here you can see our Portland Clean Energy Community Benefits Fund PCEF website. And I'll try not to scroll too quickly so it doesn't, make your eyes go up and down too much. But this is where you can find the link to all this content about providing feedback to the application and the scoring criteria. We've now developed a guide page, which you can access at the top here. And really, this is intended to help navigate in slightly more detail how to access different parts of the feedback. So if you click on here, the guide to reviewing scoring criteria, it really breaks down the type of grants and the application materials and the scoring criteria into the different buckets of planning grants, small grants, large grants, and then also a category that I neglected to mention, which is some specific questions that are around workforce and contractor development grants, which also can be either large or small grants, but just have a slightly different range of questions that are asked within those. And so for instance, for planning grants, the questions that you see will be I'm sorry, I meant to have this scrolling down, but you'll see that there's the questions as they would basically be presented. And so this is an opportunity to see those questions ahead of time and provide us feedback on whether these questions make sense, whether they're answerable, and also elements of the scoring, which I'll get to in a moment. And so that's really kind of the how to navigate to this content. And we've broken it down into, as you can see back on this page, into these different sections of feedback that we're looking for. Another key element of this is what is called the scoring criteria and guidance, which is what the people who are going to be reviewing grants are going to be using to determine what a good application looks like, kind of the different elements of an application. And so this is really, in a way, seeing behind the scenes of how decisions will be made for Portland Clean Energy Fund, and lets you see what, for instance, for this criteria, what would you receive full points, partial points, or no points, as well as the total point allocation and the distribution of that in different categories. And so if you go back to navigating to the guidance page, and we scroll down, you'll be able to see a little bit more detail of how this information will be used and the different categories that are going to be reviewed within different types of grants. And so this is not intended to be exhaustive, but more of like a overview of the concept. Also, you'll see there's scoring weighting, where some categories, and even within a category, certain criteria have different point allocations. And this is just recognizing that in regard to climate and social and racial equity and workforce and contractor elements, you know, everything could be weighted exactly the same, though the grant committee has put priority on certain elements in their review of meeting the PCEF goals. And so that's kind of the navigation that we've provided, and the purpose of this webinar is to ask questions about that and to ensure that this approach makes sense overall. And so I'm going to go and stop sharing, go back to the slideshow real quick. Just one moment. And so then if in navigating through all of that content and really choosing what part of the application you might be interested in, we're trying to provide a pathway to, so to speak, choose your own adventure, or to like curate your own feedback, because we recognize that this is a lot of content, and that you as an organization may not be interested in every single element. And so you'll see in that guidance document a link to the survey form, which is how we're gathering this feedback and public input. And within that survey, it gives you the opportunity to skip forward through sections and to really decide what you want to focus on. And so I'm not going to go into the survey online the way I did with the two other elements. But I wanted to show kind of, these are the general types of categories we've broken the survey into. And so it's about planning grants, small grants, large grants, some specific questions on workforce and contractor development, as well as how you feel about this process itself, and some information about you as an individual or you as an organization, and how you might be interested in engaging with PCEF funding, as well as some information about who you serve or who you are. So we have an understanding of whether we're reaching the priority populations for PCEF and really meeting our equity goals. In general, we're asking questions about whether the questions are clear in the application, whether they're answerable by your organization, whether you feel like you can effectively put information in there, and whether the allocation of points and scoring weighting is fair, whether it makes sense to you, and whether overall we're on track. There's also opportunity to just provide feedback on a very general level without having to get into as much detail if you really want to skip the kind of criteria by criteria elements of that. And so I want to provide just a little bit of a timeline of where we're at now, where we're going. Sam, go ahead if you want to.
Yeah, one thing, if you go back one slide, I just want to add real quick to this. I think the survey is exactly where we'd love for folks to provide feedback, but we just want to acknowledge that we're willing to take feedback however you're willing to provide it. So if you want to email feedback to us, we'll take it that way. If you want to give us a call and leave us a voicemail, we'll take it that way as well. And I want to just acknowledge we are also individually reaching out to smaller organizations, certainly organizations focused on the Black and Indigenous communities, and doing one-on-ones as well. So just want to call that out as far as how we're getting feedback.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. Neglected to mention that. Yeah, we do want to provide many avenues for feedback, and so we're open to all of those that Sam mentioned. And you can also print out the survey as a PDF if you want as well. It could even be mailed in if needed. So going forward to the timeline, just in terms of where we are now, we're kind of towards the middle of June. Also wanted to note that we are planning to extend the timeline for survey feedback an additional week. So what we currently have posted has feedback period ending next Friday. And so we're going to be extending it an additional week into that winds up being the 26th of June. So that's a very important piece. We'll also be providing additional webinars, and this gives us additional time to make sure that we're reaching everybody, especially recognizing that right now organizations are going through a lot, people are going through a lot, and especially Black, Indigenous, people of color organizations, we want to ensure that we're providing that space. So we do have a a deadline of sorts, and that we're seeking to release the RFP for grants on August 10th. And so what will be happening between the 26th after we receive public input, and then will really be a lot of reflection and work of incorporating that feedback. And the grant committee will be reconvening to finalize the RFP process as well as the grant scoring criteria, and making modifications if needed to the questions and some of those elements that we're asking for feedback on. We then anticipate that we'll have an application period open for 60 days, so into effectively the beginning of September. And then applications will be coming in through that period, and then a review process throughout the fall that then the committee will make a recommendation for funding based on the scoring and technical review and some of those elements that are articulated in the website. And then we'll go to council for approval and then be able to start implementing grant awards. One piece that I want to note that we're going to be providing additional guidance on in the near future is that in order to engage in a grant agreement with the city of Portland, you need to be, as an organization, what's called a vendor. And we will be providing some guidance for organizations to be able to set up vendor registration well ahead of when grant awards would be made, if you're at all interested in participating in PCEF. Becoming a vendor doesn't obligate the city to make any award, but it's just a registration that organizations can have to make it easier as we move forward. So just want to note that there'll be more information coming out in the near future. And so I think for now, let's go ahead and open things up for questions on clarifying questions about the process of public input or the structure of the either application and questions or the scoring criteria. And then we can get into, if we have time, more feedback and comments about the content. And just want to also note, we did schedule this to end at 1, but we as staff are available if people want to extend that. So Sam, do you want to be the kind of moderator of questions? If people have a question, you can raise your hand or I guess call it out from the chat box, Sam.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Yep. And just to reiterate, we'll hang here well after 1 o'clock to the extent that folks have questions. So, all right. So open up to clarifying questions first, and just either type it out in the chat box or raise your hand. And we got the first one in the chat box. Is the RFP open from August 10th through October 9th? Yes, Michael, that is correct. With the extending of the public comment period for a week, we did push out the RFP opening. It originally was going to open on August 3rd. We're now it's going to release on August 10th. It's just that's what our timelines are tight. So it'll open on August 10th and it'll close October 9th. That's appropriate. That's what you should plan for.
Okay, I'll read out a question that I got. It was sent, I think, privately, but I think it's still relevant, of whether people can download the full document if you don't want to click on a lot of links. And yes, and initially that's how we posted it, as one full document, the entire, as Sam mentioned, 104 pages. And so yes, you still can download the whole packet if you want to review it that way. Though in the last few days, we've also broken it down into smaller sections to make it easier for folks that don't want to go through the entire thing and just want to focus, let's say, on planning grants or on a small grant criteria. All right, additional questions coming in? Okay, I have a question from Ellie Hardwick of whether we can speak more about nonprofit eligibility requirements. For example, if a nonprofit is not registered in Oregon but does work in Portland, the only way the organization would be eligible is to have a fiscal sponsor that is a registered nonprofit in Oregon. So yeah, that is an important question, and our kind of criteria of eligibility is really 3 parts, and I didn't have a slide about it, but that's entity be a 501 tax eligible nonprofit, kind of from the federal level. It doesn't have to, I'll note that it does not have to be a 501c3. There's other 501 tax exempt designations that are also open and eligible. However, the organization does also, the applicant does need to be registered as a nonprofit organization with the Oregon Secretary of State. So that is a criteria. And the Oregon Secretary of State maintains a website and a registration process. Then also the third criteria is that the organization not be on the Oregon Department of Justice list of disqualified charities, which are charities that have been investigated and found to have been not operating in good faith or had some fraud allegations. And there's really a very few number of those. But the opportunity for fiscal partnership or fiscal sponsorship is definitely there. And so, yes, to answer your question in a single word, yes, a organization, or more than one word, but yes, an organization not registered in Oregon would work with a fiscal agent or a fiscal sponsor.
The second question I see here, I'll take them, James, is from Hannah Cruz. How long are the application support grants available? We're still working on that process. We do plan to go to City Council, or hope to go to in front of City Council to get this the application support grants approved next week. So presumably, we're still working on that process, but we're thinking it would be in the range of at least a few weeks. But we're working through that still. So welcome. If you have feedback there, we're welcome to hear it.
Yeah, just a quick reminder too that if you would like to ask us questions, through video chat or through live video, feel free to just raise your hand, which is a function that you can access in the participants section down at the bottom, and then we can call on you. It totally works to put your questions in the chat box too. But let's see, general question about the survey from Claire Burt of would we prefer the organizations to apply as a group with one survey response or as individuals? That's a good question. Sam, do you want to take that? Or
I think it's really, in some ways it's up to you. I think there is, to the extent that we get a singular unified perspective that's thought through things, that always helps us out. But if you want to submit multiple perspectives, I think we can navigate that too. In the end, we will take all of these survey responses and summarize them. So what we're looking for is feedback that gives us suggestions and thoughts around how we ultimately take this and make this better. So I think that I'll put that back your way, and it's a question for you all.
Yeah, and just one note that in the survey, it does kind of ask that question of whether you are responding as a individual community member or on behalf of an organization, and then that splits into a couple questions of who the organization serves. And so there is some benefit to us in understanding the perspective of organizations and who they serve, but that is totally up to you. And yeah, you can also answer the survey completely anonymously. It's optional to provide your information about who you are or even what organization you are. So we're leaving this fairly open-ended. And yeah, again, kind of you can choose your own adventure through this, but.
Yeah. Next question is from Michael Human. It's, as currently written, the scoring criteria within the ranges seem vague. Can that be clarified or made specific? Michael, this may be an opportunity. I'm not sure we fully understand, and it may be that you're looking at the high-level categories, but I might ask you to, if you could, Michael, if you're willing, I might ask if you could just speak to the question a little bit and explain it a little more.
Sure, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great,
Yep.
Thank you. My question here, I should probably turn on my video. My question has more to do with when you look at, James, when you showed earlier the page and it had the different scoring category, scoring items, and then you had categories from full points to partial points to no points. The descriptions as to how you earned or fell within either one of those three things doesn't seem terribly clear. Now, for something that has 3 points, Obviously, people want to score as well as they can, but clarity would help us know where we're likely to land in terms of what makes you know, a full score, what makes a middle score, and then what makes zero score. And I would imagine a middle score is not one, but there's probably a range there that you will determine. But right now, it just seems vague.
Yeah, maybe I'll quickly go back to that because I think I understand what you're referring to.
Yeah,
Just a second.
I
need
think,
to.
yeah, as James navigates through, what I'll just share is I think, yeah, there, Michael, what I think it's to the extent that there's specific criteria you can point to, and you know, and if you have suggestions, I mean, we recognize in putting this out, there are some areas where we were like this, we couldn't quite get the language, and at the same end, we knew we wanted to go out with it in order to not slow the process down. So if there's areas where you have suggestions where you think if you add this, it can help. Recognizing that we're still trying to fit these these scoring criteria, these sort of these guidelines for what gets full scores for a range of types of projects. So welcome. We welcome feedback in that area.
And I guess the other thing I'll note is that in some of these, there are some elements and criteria where there are clear kind of distinctions of what gets full points, what gets partial points, and what gets no points. But you're right that some of this is a little bit subjective. And so the intent is for this to be fairly clear. And so we welcome feedback about, and detailed feedback about how to make this more clear within those different criteria. And there's the opportunity in the survey to answer kind of on a, you know, section by section basis. So we welcome that feedback.
While I'm here, can I ask another question?
Sure.
I appreciate it. In the document, it says that part of the grant review process may include or will include, I'm not sure which, an opportunity if the grant scoring folks have questions that they may contact whoever's submitting the grant to ask for clarification or to get some more information. Mm-hmm. The question I have is, does that mean that once somebody clarifies, might they be given the opportunity to resubmit that section with the better information, or is it just the interaction of giving the information that clarifies, or is it just feedback that says, we're not scoring you really well because this wasn't clear? What's the intent there?
This is a place where I might ask Katie or Janet to jump in, because they've engaged most directly with the subcommittee that's been working on this process. So I don't know if Janet or Katie would like to answer that.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. This is
so Katie, your volume's really low.
So I'm happy to answer that. Can you hear me?
Yep, we got you.
Okay, I'm just gonna hold this in front of my mouth here. Yeah, so the intent, there's a couple of different places where applicants where there's sort of an opportunity after the application submission deadline for applicants to kind of engage with the review process. There's the one that I think you were talking about is just asking for clarification, and that really is just like simple clarification, and there shouldn't be any additional information provided or a resubmission of a portion of the application. It really is just like, we didn't get this, or this seems like a typo, can we make sure it is, or things like that, or you're missing a zero here, we just want to make sure you actually meant this. Just really straightforward clarification. And that would go through staff. So staff would contact the grant applicant and get that clarification and bring it back to the scoring panel. And then there's a second place, which is after the scoring panel has individually, after each member of the scoring panel has individually scored, the sort of average score and a little bit of feedback will be sent to the applicant, and the applicant will have an opportunity to provide a response. And that will likely be a written response in a sort of predetermined format so that everybody's given the same format to respond in, either written or recorded a certain amount of time. And then the review panel can consider that feedback when they get together and discuss their scores and come up with a final score for that application.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Mhm.
Great, thank you, Katie. We have an additional question here from Alejandro Orezola. Prior or during the application period, will PCEF staff be available to discuss specifics on potential projects or answer questions about the application process? So I guess what I'd say is that we're not really able to provide guidance or coaching on applications, though we can certainly answer clarifying questions about the process itself. We also will be having some resources available and trainings that will be available to anybody who's interested around certain capacity building elements. And this is something that will start this summer and be an ongoing part of the program. But we can't really, as staff, be providing individual consultation on project ideas. So yeah, I probably.
What I'll share is that you will host similar webinars where we will be able to answer clarifying questions. And just from a process perspective, we're going to gather all those questions, and we will post that for everyone. So that, I mean, the biggest thing is that we're providing equal and consistent information for everyone. So as those clarifying questions are going to be needed, we will be able to answer those, and we will post that for everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. All right, additional questions that are, I guess, clarifying about the process, or and if not, we can go more into comments about the content for those of you who have had a chance to review it. We recognize this is still early, and you may not have actually had a chance to read through the content, but. Question from Hannah Cruz: are there caps on the number of projects accepted per grant category? I'm wondering if you're, I think the answer to your question is no. It's really dependent on the applications we get in and the committee decision on which ones to fund. I think to some degree, the maximum amount of funding of $1 million per grant for the large grants, I'd say if there were a large number of large grants awarded, then that would be a small, or if there's a lot of large grants awarded, that would be a small number of total projects. And so, I think there's an eye within the committee of balancing that within the portfolio. And also, within the category, there are targets within the 4 buckets of funding: clean energy, workforce, green infrastructure, and innovation. However, we can balance that over multiple grant periods as well. So the answer is really no, there's no fixed caps.
And maybe I'll just add on to that point about cap before going to the next one. We welcome feedback there. That's something that if you folks want to provide feedback, feel free to provide feedback. That's a cap that is relevant to this year that felt appropriate given the size of the fund, but we expect that there'll be a future discussion on whether that's going to be relevant when we go out with a larger pool of funds in next year. So when we're looking for feedback on the cap that's really relevant to this year, we know that we're going to come back to that conversation next year as we go out with the 40 to 60 million. The next question from Kate Allen is, are organizations able to participate in more than one application? And the answer is yes.
Question from Joshua Baker: for eligibility screening, does the Made in the USA apply to energy efficiency products like LEDs or strictly renewable energy generating systems? So the language that is in the initiative and legislation is really specific to renewable energy generation. And we're still defining exactly the threshold and criteria around that, but there is also a clause that allows for exemption from that if there's a significant cost differential, and so or if the products are not available. And Sam, did you want to add anything to that, or? No.
Sorry, I muted. I think I would look in the full application, or there is in the 104-page document, we do describe how we're going to be looking at that. To reiterate with James, it only applies to renewables, but we actually do have a threshold, and I forget what the number is, whether it's 20 or 30%. So there is a number in there. I would just reference folks to look at it in the 104. It's
20.
I'm like scrolling through it to find it. Katie, did you have the answer?
Yep, it's 20%.
20%. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you, Katie. I
Great.
somehow remembered there being a threshold, but I wasn't sure if it was defined yet. So.
Yeah, equipment essentially must be at least 20% more expensive to be considered cost prohibitive, in which case then you can not go with the made in the US.
All right, additional questions? Or feel free to raise your hand if you, virtually, if you have one. And I guess I'd open it up if people do have comments or feedback then on different sections of the application or scoring criteria, and want to provide verbal feedback instead of, or in supplement to providing survey or some other form. I have a hand up from Michael Human.
Hi, sorry to monopolize so much, but I've got a question for in the realm of contracting organizations who would do the work under the category of energy, weatherization, energy upgrades, and perhaps solar, but for the most part, for energy upgrades, there used to be a large number of contractors doing this work. That has decreased recently because of the changes in the economy, because Portland, or because the Oregon energy project went away. And so there are fewer companies, either women or minority owned, or even non-women or minority owned local businesses. Are there going to be efforts to try to either stimulate and encourage those to come forward and to be known and made available, so that people who are wanting to write for grants, making applications that would, if they're funded, need to use these folks, they could start developing relationships with them and agreements? But is that something, or is that beyond what you're envisioning?
I can take this one. I think, Michael, I really appreciate it. It's a great point. It's the marketplace today for residential, for folks doing the residential energy retrofits does look a whole lot different than it looked a handful of years ago. I think what we would say is that there's this first year, there's quite a bit that we're pulling together, and I think that really is a place for conversation in probably year two, in terms of just what is the role programmatically that we take in terms of really supporting this broader ecosystem of contractors that do this space, and supporting them in a way that is certainly diversifying that space and providing that support. So we don't know what that's going to look like. We don't have that. You know, what we have this year is we have the application, which asks folks to go out and find those contractors and be able to make their commitments as part of their grant applications. But we recognize that there's more work to be done there. So that's not something that we have planned for, you know, for this particular cycle, but I know it's something that we've discussed broadly, that there's going to be more there to sort of create that space in order to evaluate how we deepen that. So it's an imperfect answer, and it's just to acknowledge that it's something that we know is work we'll need to do, just not work we're positioned to do it this year.
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe also, just since you mentioned it, just wanted to note that there are some questions in the survey, and there are some questions in the applications that are broken down depending on the type of project that's being applied for. And so this has to do with different thresholds of what the total contracting budget is, capital budgets or capital projects that are doing improvements of more than $350,000 at a single site, will have different workforce questions and requirements. And so definitely diversifying the workforce and also the pool of contractors is a part of the goals of this program. But in this initial application period, it's more about articulating those goals and then holding those projects to them as they move forward, rather than an approach of setting hard targets. So hopefully that makes sense. It's not exactly the question you were asking, Michael, but I think it's related. So so I'll go back to the chat. Oh, back to this and back to the chat box. Just a I think it's just a general thank you from Charity. So thank you. Additional questions or thoughts or reflections on the content that you've seen so far?
James, this is Michael again. Can I raise one while we're waiting for the next one to come in? I apologize for dominating, but this is a question that relates to many of the frontline community organizations who represent a lot of communities. Once the grants are let, and I'm thinking now in terms of the workforce development, will PCEF staff or the PCEF program kind of make an announcement about who are the awarded contractors, so that the different community organizations who want to steer people to those funded programs where they could apply to become apprentices and enroll in the program. Is that something you have in mind? It's a little, it's a little different from the questions for now, but it's just anticipatory so that
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, so what I would say is, and this goes to the slide that James had just shared a second ago. If you're doing a project where you're not doing a singular investment at a singular site with at least 350,000, so let's say your proposal is to retrofit homes or multiple small commercial buildings across many sites, and no singular investment at a site is 350,000, we don't require you in the application to tell us who your contractor is going to be. It can certainly get you additional points to the extent you do know your contractor and you do know, and they're meeting certain diversity commitments and goals, but it's not a requirement. So I think, in one sense, there's a certain subset of projects that not all projects will know when they're put in an application, because it's not a requirement as part of the application. And then there are others, those that are above 350,000, where we do say we want to know your contractor that you're coming in with. And so I think it's a conversation we haven't really had yet, but I hear your point. I think there's probably something we can do there around. It may not necessarily be something we release immediately, but it may be that as folks begin contracting with us and begin on their project work, and as they start to identify their contractors, that's something that we, as part of their contract agreements, we sort of agree to set up those, agree to make that information known. So that's good feedback, and it's something we'll certainly talk about. And if you're open to it, we'd love to maybe continue to chat and hear more of the thoughts there.
So thank you for that. But where I'm trying to get is a little bit different, and that is for the many frontline organizations who may know of individuals in their community who they want to steer towards entering the apprenticeship programs. Once the awards are made for the grant section on workforce development, will the names of the successful contractors be made available so the community can start sending potential applicants their way as a way to help direct our people to the jobs they're going to want to get trained for? Thank you.
Yeah, I think thanks for re-specifying the question. And certainly when we announce the grants, we will be providing information on the workforce and contractor development pool of grants of which programs and which approaches, and a little bit of information about what the project is, or what their priority populations are, or target populations have been identified. We still have to have a lot of conversations of what that kind of announcement of grant awards looks like, but yeah, you have a very good point of kind of indicating to the community where that opportunity is, and I think we can do that. All right. Let's see. I'm not seeing any raised hands or any new
So,
questions.
well-
Thank you though for the words of support in the chat box. We do appreciate that.
Yeah, what I would, well, we know that we sent out this, the 104 pages last Tuesday, so it's still quite early. And so we will have another webinar next week on, is it the 16th? I think it's the 16th.
Yeah.
We will schedule another one the week of the 22nd. I think we've tentatively, and we'll send that information out here shortly, but that's going to be likely on the morning of the 23rd. So we'll have another couple opportunities for folks to ask their questions and just get clarifying questions as you go through the document. At the same time, please don't hesitate to email, call us, leave us voicemails as you do have those clarifying questions or are wondering. There's a lot we've put out there, and I think if folks are limited on time, we certainly would tell folks, focus on the type of grant you think you're interested in, whether that's a planning, a small or large grant, and dive in there and take a look and see how it would work for you around what you're thinking about. We're gonna hang here in case questions come up, but I just want to share that it's been an incredible pleasure for us to work on this and see the various types of projects that folks are dreaming and thinking of. And we recognize that we're not going to get everything right this year. And so, but at the same end, we're open to feedback and making adjustments and bringing that to the committee. And I think they're equally eager to get that feedback. So.
Yeah, so thank you all. Feel free to drop off the call if you'd like, but we'll also be, we'll be here till 1. So unless all of you drop off, in which case we will.
And I think I'm just getting a reminder that certainly as you are providing feedback, we welcome more specific feedback is always better.
Yeah.
Just there's a lot of gymnastics we're doing to find the right words to describe some pieces, and sometimes we know we don't always get it. So if you've got direct thoughts, please let us know.
Yeah, and I do see a raised hand here from Stephen Achilles. So yeah, go ahead, Stephen.
Thank you, Jamie. So a quick question, and I want to thank Katie for helping us learn more and get Exceed Enterprises engaged. My question has to do a lot of discussion about who the a population is that they're working on, but we work with, we say people with diverse abilities, the language that you have is people with disabilities. I just wanted to confirm that that is one of the target populations that is for this program.
Yeah, so this may be an area where the language of the initiative is interesting as you get into nuance. There really is two priority population groups that are broadly discussed within the initiative. There is one priority population is from a beneficiary perspective. This is about those who are receiving the projects, those who are getting their homes weatherized, their buildings with renewable energy, with the green infrastructure around their communities. And the target populations within the initiative are low-income people and people of color. And then there are target populations around those that are getting to enjoy the benefits from a workforce perspective. And those are the folks that are getting employed on projects. Those are the contractors that are getting to get these opportunities. And those entities, it's a wider list. The priority populations there are low-income people of color. I mean, I never get it, but folks with disabilities as well as women, and those otherwise chronically underemployed. And so that's sort of a wider list when you look at the folks that are on the doing the projects themselves, on the workforce of the contractor side. And then I'll stop there because there's more we could say there, but at least there's two priority populations from in the initiative, and it's looked at a slightly different ways.
So thank you, Sam, and I will add my list. This is not easy work, so thank you the entire team very much.
Thank you.
Welcome, and thank you for being here and giving us input. All right. Any other questions or reflections?
Okay. Well, we are. I will acknowledge we are excited for the open RFP period. So if there are additional thoughts, even just around how we run, recognizing that we are likely going to be in a remote working type of situation when the RFP opens up in August. If you have just even thoughts around just the process around how we ultimately come back during the RFP period and sort of put out a question and answer session, please let us know as well if this worked for you.
Yeah, and also just note that do stay tuned for more information in the coming weeks about both the application support grant opportunity for, and again, that's focused on small organizations that serve marginalized populations with priority on Black and Indigenous people. And then also some additional guidance that we'll be providing in the near future about how to get set up as a vendor, where to do that, and kind of the process to get set up, because that is a process that can take 6 to 8 weeks. So we want to be able to reduce those barriers up front. Again, it's not a commitment that an organization will receive funding, but just kind of getting in the system with the city. Also, just note that if you'd like to sign up for our listserv to receive updates, you can do that on the PCEF website, which is, I don't have it off the top of my head, but you can navigate through Google. So
If you go to the last slide, it'll list it over there, James.
oh yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. There we go. And yeah, this is how to reach us as a program, and then we kind of allocate emails to staff as needed. All right, so we'll hang on for just a couple more minutes if you do have questions.
We are winding down.
Yep.
Any questions at all?
List,
Yeah.
Well, if there really are none, we might end 1 minute early here, but
No, this is. Stay tuned. We'll acknowledge. We'll acknowledge the remaining. We will send out an update about the extension as well as additional webinar dates later. So we know that folks would still be digging in. So please dig in, and then we'll have another opportunity to connect. All right.
all right, great. Thank you all. And yeah, I think I will go ahead and end the webinar 1 minute early. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, James. Thank you all.